Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man whose efforts have come to an end.
Oh, Tim Longo.
When that quote came up in this play of Final Fantasy Tactics, I was like, chef's kiss. That's what I want.
Well, it definitely feels that way for me with this game.
You'll like the outro then.
Oh, good. Okay, good. I mean, it's hard because we're talking about Final Fantasy Tactics, our final episode, unfortunately. And it's hard because I really wish it wasn't my final. This isn't the end for me, but I just don't know. This is like a retirement game. I'll play this when I'm retired. But I don't know if I will touch it again.
Yeah. I mean, who knows if he'll even still have a PS3 at that time.
Oh, yeah. Fair enough. Yeah. Or if it'll work correctly.
Yeah, or if it'll work.
PSN will be not functioning anymore.
Well, clearly. But I mean, as long as it's still downloaded, you'll be good. So it just has to keep working. Anyway, we don't have lots of notes that we're going to make about this section, or what we've played this week. We have a couple things to talk about, but mostly we'll go to our takeaways, which I'm totally unprepared for, by the way.
Yeah, they're inherent. I think you know.
Yeah, I mean, I've played this game before.
Yeah.
Most of them, honestly, I'm pretty off the cuff about. It's like, what do I feel in the moment? So it's not.
I just have a terrible memory, so I have to write it down.
Yeah, that's fair. It's not a well considered thing for me. Often, like, why did he say that? Well, he needed a third one. It's often the answer. So there's a few
behind the curtain.
Yeah, a little behind, a little production information there that you probably didn't want to know. So last week, you had a kind of. I don't know. I was going to call it a come to Jesus moment, but it's more of a come to Satan moment, where you just kind of are like, yeah, I love it and I hate it.
Well, you afterwards post show, you called it a therapy session, which I think it really was, unintentionally so, but it felt like it afterwards.
Mm. Well, I hope you feel, appropriately cleansed of your sins. Or something.
I didn't say well, I guess it is a confessional too. Yeah.
It was also that. Yeah. For me, I can't not finish the games, because I was raised Catholic, and
yeah, right. That makes
as you mentioned confessionals.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And on the East Coast, whereas you're a West Coast boy, and it's just like it's all loosey goosey over there. Sneakers are what we called California hiking boots. Anyway, I mean, things that we should probably touch on. One thing that we just discovered in pre-show was, there are side quests in this game, or at least there's at least one side quest, which I found part of. And then Tim was looking it up, and he's like, oh, well, did you know you could do this? And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, I would never do that, because the next step in my quest that I'm on would be going to a specific place, entering the bar, and going into the rumors section, which I have literally not done other than the first time I did it, where I was like, oh, this is where they deliver backstory. Nope. Apparently that's a vector for other stuff in this game.
Yeah, and there's 16 side quests, but
16 side quests.
Yeah, but the one we talked about pre-show, the Golan Coal City one, looks like this 4 levels. So I think it's the same quest. You just have 4.
Yeah, it's a little quest line
levels. Yeah, gotcha. It's a quest line, but the rest of them I think are single maps that I just have weird, unclear ways to unlock them. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, that's just, I discovered, Aeris or Aerith, however people prefer to pronounce that, from Final Fantasy VII, the flower selling girl. She appears in a location on the critical path. And she kind of wanders off, and he says about her, it's just the day and age about her appearance in this game, which I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. And then later I did go to Gaug, which is the second step of this quest, apparently. And I had a cutscene happen there where I was like, oh, this must happen because I'm in chapter 4. I had no idea it had any connection whatsoever to this other thing that happened clear across the continent.
Yeah.
Like there is no indication whatsoever that they are in any way related. And then to find the next step of that, which involves going into a bar and into the rumors section of that bar, is like, I mean, I don't know how to feel about that, honestly. I mean, it's funny because I don't, you know, you know, when we played Kingdom Hearts, as I mentioned previously, I did not find any of those bosses, you know, the sort of bonus bosses on my original playthrough at all. Had no idea they were there. And they're very different. They're not like Disney stuff. They're very like their own thing. They're very Final Fantasy stuff, honestly. So to discover that this game also has that, I was just like, oh, are you kidding me? Like, do I need to replay with a guide? Like to go find all the stuff? No, spoilers. He did not play with a guide, but I don't know. I was just like, oh, I mean, I kind of appreciate it. And I kind of like, ugh, you know, if I didn't know, like, so this is pretty pre-internet. And I guess if I didn't know, I'd be like, huh, you know, I mean, I definitely got to this step with what is I believe a robot head and was like, huh, that's interesting. I wonder how I progress this. And I was like, well, maybe it's level based or maybe it's like the main story based. As I unlock stuff there, I should keep coming back here. But to go to another city and enter its bar and go to the rumors section, yeah, that's. I mean.
Yeah, and it looks, you know, as I'm looking at the list, I bet this isn't true across the board, but it looks like maybe, you know, they have locations that you've seen maybe in a cutscene or something that they end up using as a battle scene for these side quests.
Oh, I see.
Or like one clue is like, oh, I've been to Golan City, but it wasn't a battle, but I thought it was going to be. And then this one particular we're talking about, that becomes a battle scene when you do the side chain, you know, unlock it basically. So it's now Golan City is a battle site. So I don't know. That might be a clue, but who knows? I don't know if that's true for all of them. But yeah, I just realized too. This site I'm looking at is called the Caves of Narche, which is funny, and I know what that means. So I'm excited about that.
I'm glad you're getting there. You know, bit by bit, I'm bringing you into the fold.
Yeah. I mean, so you know, there's the side quest unlocking, which is definitely I feel like of its time kind of mentality with this stuff. But because I didn't even achieve my goal that I had set out last episode, I was farther behind than I thought. Of finishing chapter 2, I'm close, but I didn't get there. What is Brett's version of the story? Like, what did I miss? Like, what is the macro?
Wow.
I mean, and the reason I said it that way is because I know Brett's version is going to be a very special version that will be not like most people's version. It'll be more like, I think there's this guy, and then there's a monster.
Well, so I do have I don't exactly have a story. Because,
sure, or whatever your impressions.
So for me, it's really power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts. Absolutely is really the story.
So Final Fantasy.
Yeah, because I mean, that's not always the story, but in this one in particular, and there's the mission that I got to, which is the 21st of 25 story missions in chapter 4, and I'll finish over the next few days. I'd spent a ton of time doing like propositions, which are like, so I had tons of random battles, etc. I'm level like 62. So I was trying to find additional classes, which another thing I guess we can touch on. Because some of that stuff is a little hidden. Anyway, because I know the classes are there, I just don't know. I thought they were getting unlocked by sort of level like, oh, you hit level 30, these classes are now available to you. And it turns out that that's not the case.
Yeah, if you're not using a guide, you'd have to level
You have to
every
be
job
experimenting.
up
Yeah,
to
yeah.
see what happens.
You have to be leveling things in combination. I mean, if you look at the manual and you're like, oh, I see there are these classes that are, more mental or more physical, you can probably gather that, I need to go and do more of the mental ones to find the mental classes, and I need to do more of the physical ones to find the physical classes, because that is a clear divide in the game. Anyway, I'm in this mission where I've gone, to the hell dimension, and
okay.
Oh yeah, definitely, it's a thing that happens. Ramza's there, and there's this conversation with this enemy dude whose name I was playing this like half an hour ago. I already forgot his name. And he's like, well, you're just, Ramza's like, you've just been, caught up in the blah, blah, blah. And it's basically just like, it's actually, I think it's the guy from, remember early on in like the Thieves Fort, he has this conversation with a thief, and he kind of lets the guy go. I think it's that guy.
Yeah, there's a guy that runs away there.
Exactly. I think it's him, and somehow he has gotten folded into this thing again. And he's basically representing, more of a commoner, whereas of course Ramses sort of theoretically represented this noble family, although he's kind of, being like the third or fourth son or whatever he is, like he's not even really in the line of succession. So it's like, he's not.
He's the Harry of.
Yeah, exactly. Harry. Right. He's the spare. He's like the second or third spare.
He's left the country.
Yeah. So he's got really no expectation of having this power at all or clinging to it. So he can kind of keep his ideals because, in England historically, he would have been like the guy who goes off and becomes a priest, because what are you going to do with the fourth son, right? Or he might become an earl or whatever, some minor gentry. But normally they try to keep all the wealth in the one eldest son, so it's like, okay, so as not to dilute the power, I guess. Anyway, so he basically can retain his idealism through all of this. Well, along the way, there's a lot of quite striking stuff. For example, Dysadarg, who is one of the older brothers, I think the eldest son, it turns out that he slowly poisoned his father to death. The one who's on his sickbed at the beginning of the game.
Wow.
So he was slowly poisoning him, and that is discovered by Zalbag, who you also probably remember, because he overhears a conversation in which one of these holy stone entities is like, if you use this most fungus poison, it causes the corpse to break out in most fungus mushrooms after it's interred. And he's like, and so that's how Zalbag learns. And then Zalbag and Dysadarg have a big fight, which you intrude on at some point. The big story is that all of these people who are seeking after power are trying to get these holy stones. I don't even know if you found a Zodiac stone yet.
I have, yeah. Well, okay. I mean, I think.
Oh, right, because Mustadio. There was one. Yeah, there's one in the chimney. Mustadio had one.
Right. He fakes it. He does a fake one and all that.
Yeah, correct. Okay, so those are
basically those in Final Fantasy 12, by the way.
Or not that I recollect, but I may not have made. If they were, I may not have made the connection.
About the 12 Zodiac Braves.
I wouldn't say so, but you should definitely play it to determine that for yourself. You have it on the Switch. In fact, you're going to be doing a lot of traveling and stuff for the next few weeks. And you should consider loading that onto your Switch and taking it along.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark Garcia, by the way.
Anyway, so where was I? Oh, right. So the big story with the stones is that like different people have them. It's like an artifact that's been held on to, and they're kind of dispersed throughout the world, and different people have control of them. But if you try to use the power of them, and you have a somewhat corrupted soul to begin with, I mean, essentially, if you're going to do this to get power, you're probably a little corrupted. It basically becomes a vector through which these demons can come through and like take over your body. And now you're not you anymore. You're gone, and they are there controlling the body, and ultimately they can break through. So it's kind of sad because you didn't even get to any of the moments. There's one at the end of chapter 2, so in the next few levels for you, where that actually happens, and it's the first time you get an inkling that this is what this is about. Like, this is the actual kind of quest, is like, I have to go find all these stones, which is it's not a quest in the sense of like you have to figure out for yourself. It's just the main story path is you're going to run into all these people. It's sort of like, do you see that miniseries, The Room, with the guy from 6 Feet Under?
No.
Oh, okay. It's about these like objects of power and that are in our world. It's like a real world thing, but they all got their power because they were in this one room when something happened to make them powerful.
Oh, so like Control.
It's sort of like Control. So like there's a key. Oh yeah. The people who made Control totally watched The Room. There's a key that you can open any door and think about where you want to go. And now that door goes through the door into that place.
I guess I should watch this show.
And you should totally watch this. You would love this 3-part miniseries, which is like 6 hours, with the guy from 6 Feet Under. So anyway, the one who's married to Lorelai.
The main one?
The one, yeah.
Yeah, right. I don't think they're married, but yeah.
Or whatever. They're together. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's basically, it's like that. There are these 12 things, and just having them kind of draws all these people together. And that's what ultimately this real conflict is about, is all these different people have been corrupted by this thing, and the world is just being torn apart by their fights. But they're not fighting each other. They just want to destroy humanity.
Of course.
So that's kind of the story, right? But because Ram's heart is so pure, and because Alma's heart is so pure, we're led to believe that they will somehow, I don't know, be able to turn this back. And final note, I'm pretty sure Alma turns out, because they're talking about it through the story, Alma is going to be their vessel to bring through like their top demon that they're all trying to resurrect. All these demons are like, oh yeah, but we got to get the angel of death or whatever, and bring her back. And turns out Alma is the vessel for that.
Yeah.
So, I got some of the story.
Yeah, no, I think yeah. I mean, once this first stone was revealed, and then they talked about the story of the Zodiac Brave story, I was like, oh, okay. The 12 stones are going to be a key element.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's a common trope of like, find the 12 things and go, or 7 things or whatever number.
It's 12 because it's the Zodiac, and they each have I would say features of their, like, you fight one at one point that turns into a ram.
Yeah,
and that's the Aeris one.
Right.
And you've already seen that there's like a bull demon. I think Dysadarg turns into the Taurus like incarnation. You don't see all the incarnations, I don't think, but you see a bunch of them. Yeah, there's a lot of intrigue. Like, there's a lot of details of the story because it's a Final Fantasy game that I'm, kind of eluding. But that's kind of the main beats. Is like, this whole thing started because this one guy wanted to ascend to the throne sooner, and then it became this whole thing where there are all these people sort of competing for the throne. That princess from the beginning, who we think is the next queen or empress or whatever of Ivalice, she's actually not even the actual person. That young woman was killed when she was a baby, and this was the substitute or something. So like, there's just like layers, and Delita's still working towards that. Like, no, I'm going to see you put on the throne because you're not of noble blood. We can like turn this whole thing upside down, and so, it's a whole.
Those themes are cool though. I mean, I am impressed. I'm
cool.
impressed,
and they do thread through all of this.
Yeah, very, very. Not even just Shakespearean. I mean, the historical plays. It feels very much like that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Your
Richards and your Henrys.
Yeah, it feels very, very much like that. Kind of like, well, it's like it's early Game of Thrones, really.
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, which was that based on?
Yeah, exactly.
We happy few, we band of brothers.
He just ripped off. Yeah. So
yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, now I'm really, because I love when developers try to take, especially within Final Fantasy, because it's meant to be such a, each sort of, I mean, I guess 10 and 13 had their sort of like sequels, which are logical connections, but for the most part, each era doesn't connect to the other eras, you know what I mean? So like to have this one take place in the same kingdom as 12, now I'm really interested to know, like, does 12 take place before or after this, or in between, or
and I don't know, and I honestly would like to replay 12 because I really did. That's one of my favorites. I didn't love 10. I like 10-2 a lot better, honestly, but 12 is, it's up there. It's probably top 3 for me. I really enjoyed it because of the world felt very imaginative in some key places, and the characters were really, with the exception of the main character, I really liked Baltier, who was originally the main character of the game, and marketing was like, oh, you can't have it be this older guy. And as an older guy, I object. Because I do think they really made a mistake there. He's basically a Han Solo character. You'd love him. So another reason I'm just going to keep pushing the Final Fantasy 12 on you. You would enjoy that. But yeah, anyway, I mean, I think that, basically, Final Fantasy is gaming's Shakespeare. I think we can just say that here.
Wow. I don't know if I'm willing to go there
People are going to look back in 500 years, Tim, and they're going to be like, wow, they really had it. They really knew what they were doing in Final Fantasy.
Maybe.
And we've only got the 16, or so now, but in time we'll have the full 40 whatever.
But like 14 on its own is like it's like whatever 10.
It's all the comedies.
10 games, right? Yeah. So if we get to Final Fantasy 36, then I will maybe buy that argument, but I don't know. Yeah.
If you count the offshoots, I bet there's well more than 36 in the
because
this one doesn't even count. This isn't even a mainline Final Fantasy game.
And they got they got 3 out of the remake of 7. So
and there were 3 in 13 as well, and 2 in 10. So it's adding up fast.
Well, you're close. You're gonna get there.
We'll get there. Yeah, we'll get there. I mean, if there's, it still has brand value, we'd say. So let's.
How close? So you're at level 62.
Yeah.
How have the battles recently been? I know you mentioned a wall mission that we'll talk about in a second, probably, but generally, is the difficulty fine for you, or?
Yeah, I mean, the story missions, we should probably just get into that topic. So there's 2 things to know. One is that the random battles scale with your level. That's why, as I revisit places, I'm getting different enemies, right? They're scaling up.
Yeah.
In fact, much of the time, I don't worry about the story missions. Much of the time. There are definitely some occasions where that is not true. But much of the time, it's like, oh, I'm just kind of on my way to another place. And usually, like, there's a chain of story missions. And the one at the end of that chain is the one you have to worry about. Because it's not just one mission. It's several missions, and it makes some demands on you. So we'll get to that momentarily. The random battles, I don't often have to worry about, but I have had missions where I'm like, oh, I was not expecting this. And sometimes it's on my end where I'm thinking of one case in particular where I loaded into the forest, Aragway Woods, I think it's called, and so there's those 4 trees. And there were like 7 ninjas on the opposing team. And I'm like, uh-oh, I haven't even faced a ninja before. Now there are 7. I don't know what they do. So that was one problem. And then the second problem was I had changed my chemist to be a dancer because I was like, well, I don't know what that does. Let me try it. So I have a character whose abilities I don't even understand. As one of my 5. And I'm seeing a class whose abilities I don't know. And I think the ninjas maybe do 2 attacks or something. They mop the floor with us. I mean, it was not pretty. It was, I mean,
that was
because
like a knowledge thing, basically.
yeah, I just didn't know at all what I was doing, and I didn't know what they could do, and I didn't know what to avoid in their case. And like, you see a wizard, you're like, okay, I don't want to group up, but like with a ninja, it's like, well, I don't even know how fast they move. So like, do I have, anyway, I wasn't geared up properly for them, etc. So that happened. But then the other thing was I had made my chemist a dancer, which I think you have to be female for, which, ugh.
Oh boy.
Because I was thinking the whole time of like, well, I'll set my dance target, which is a D&D thing I'm alluding to. Hello, Brian, if you're listening. But I only had one skill for her, and I didn't know what it did. And it's like, set the CT to 0. I'm like, I don't know what CT is. What is CT? It was like her last skill, so I'm like, that must be the best one. I'll just buy that one. And so what I could kind of work out is that the CT is kind of how it tracks who's going to go in what order.
Count timer or something. I feel
yeah,
like
something like that.
At some point,
yeah. Maybe I might have, and that went right in one ear and out the other. So yeah, that whatever that is, it would be like, oh, it basically resets them. So I had this dancer who was doing that to like one person. I was like, well, that's not helpful. Like, delaying one person in this situation is really, when I get 6 others who are going to murder my party, all that means is that person's going to eventually get to my dancer. So that happened. With the story stuff, what normally would happen is I would kind of sail through the first 2 parts of a 3-part story mission, where you can save in between and like reset your gear in between, or like do stuff with your experience or job points. But of course you don't know what's coming.
Yeah.
So you don't know what you should reset it to, A, and B, then of course, well, then you have a save point, which is nice. Where you're just like, well, if you happen to have gear that will be helpful, like when you fail, you'll at least be able to try that, from the same point. However, if you don't have what you think you need, you have to go back to before you started this chain of missions at all. So
yeah,
and I think, this may have happened to you as well, but I had a series of missions which ended with the Marquis of Elendor, like the person I was ostensibly rescuing earlier in the game, met up with him. It's actually kind of funny. There's another like minor villain who's in like just this little story chain, and he's up there on these rooftops with me and monologuing, and Elendor's 2 assassins come up, and one of them grabs this guy and just throws him off the roof. It's a great moment because you hear the sound of like somebody dying. And the problem with these characters is that, first of all, I have to save a character who you haven't met yet, but who's one of a sister and brother team, who are kind of on opposite sides of the table, which is another kind of theme in this whole thing. It's like brothers against brothers, siblings against siblings, kind of a lot of themes happening with that throughout. And that's kind of what's going on with Delita and Ramza to a degree, but not really. Like, there's a sense of true brotherhood between them. I don't know. That's a whole nother thing. But anyway,
I see it.
Yeah, you could totally see. I mean, eventually you get to a point in the story where it's like, okay, well, we don't agree about methods, but we actually kind of want the same things. Is kind of their vibe. So after that, these assassins who are powerful, they do 2 attacks per attack, so they do a lot of damage. And this character I'm supposed to prevent from dying is just getting annihilated. And meanwhile, my characters don't have gear to counteract what these assassins can do, which is to stop. Stop means basically you can no longer act. Your character comes out of the turn order. They don't do anything until stop wears off. which is very powerful to use. But it's one of those things that, in D&D, we'll talk about this. Like, it feels really fun to do this to somebody. It does
like
not
a whole
feel
person.
Yeah, it does not feel so fun to have it done to you because, granted, in a game like this where you're controlling multiple characters, it's less of an issue. But at a D&D table, it's like, well, I can no longer do things. I guess I'll eat snacks for the next hour and a half while we have this battle. So that's kind of happening. Well, anyway, those characters will just straight up murder her. I got to a point where I came back to this later because I went and did a bunch of other stuff, and that character was dying in the first turn. This character I was supposed to prevent. I had literally one character able to act before she did, and it was not there was no way I could stop her doing what she was going to do. So I had to rethink my whole strategy. I had to go back out, I had to basically load an earlier save and be like, oh, I need other gear to do this. And even then it took me like 8 tries of like different configurations of gear and where I started them placed on the map. And it's probably possible to think through that stuff after seeing it once, but I certainly couldn't. I tried so many different things. And the ultimate strategy was something like, well, you need 2 really fast characters who can move a lot of distance so that they'll get an early turn and they can cover distance and do something to them at a range so that they'll get pulled off and they won't kill her. So you can deal with the other dude, the Elmdor character. And it's like, okay, I don't know how I was supposed to find that, but it made me appreciate your hardships last week, I'll say.
Yeah, and that's another. I had a baby version of that yet again this week because, and that's I think why I didn't end up finishing even chapter 2 because I ended up playing that mission 8 times myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the relevant part of the conversation here, which I think is definitely applicable to your situation, is that because I was using that as a little bit of a catalyst for the grinding conversation, but which will come up in takeaways, of course, but to no one's surprise. But the thing is about that one, and it looks like, anytime you're trying to protect somebody, I think this is going to be a challenge for the game. I don't feel like, even though I only did a couple grinding sessions, like where I just focused on that because I wanted levels. I don't think I'm that under leveled for the mission, or I'm like right on par. So the reason I was stubborn with it and I didn't, after whatever, the 5th try or the 7th try, I didn't go and grind some more, is that I got close to winning every time, like really close. I was like, oh, I got this. Totally got this. Like I said that like 5 times. And then something would happen and I would lose. And I'm like, what? Yeah. So because of the NPC, because of the RNG of it, you just don't always know what somebody's going to do. And it may be that I just don't have a handle on the jobs well enough, or there's certain things, but sometimes the NPC would go left and sometimes they would go right. And same thing with this one.
And making that predictable is hard. Yeah.
Yeah. He would die on the first round.
There are reasons. Too. There are reasons why it happens, but knowing those reasons is not always, it's not obvious. Like, this person goes after a person because they damaged them, but that might not be true of every character.
It might be, but I mean, there were a couple times I just mean as far as like there were a couple times when I'd played that mission where I did exactly the same thing twice in a row because I had to restart. Yeah, and everything was configured the same way, and he just went one way on the wall instead of the other way, and that way ended up bringing him closer to the enemies, and then he would die. So and then in that case, at least in the one early on, the baby version of this, like you do have a choice to change the objective if you want to kill all the enemies instead, so he can go down and you don't lose. So I ended up moving to that, of course, because I just was gonna, I was gonna go mad, but it was frustrating because then after I eventually finished that story mission, all the story missions after that I've done on the first try. So then I was like, well, my level is probably fine then. Yeah. They're definitely not. I'd have challenges. The
story levels are not nearly as hard generally, But I do think that there are inflection points where this is really important story-wise, and so they parallel that with difficulty.
Yeah.
Which,
that makes sense.
Well, it doesn't. It does. I mean, it does. Like, I get it. It's like you want attention. You want to feel that, and you want it to be memorable as well. Like, I had to fight really hard to do that.
I mean, that's what a boss is, really.
Yeah, it's laudable. I get how you get there. On the other hand, and I don't by any means want any of this to be a cakewalk. On the other hand, when you're doing it the 12th time, the story stuff has completely faded from your mind, and what's on the surface is, I am so tired of doing this, and that's a definite frustration I have, with this sort of thing. Like, I never minded playing the random battles at all, because they were different.
Right. Like, because, right.
I get a different mix. It's like, oh, I haven't seen a red chocobo before. Like, I wonder what that does. And like, oh no, it does meteor. I'd react to that and be like, okay. And in general though, like, so they would be memorable for reasons of like, oh, that's the first time I saw this. But I overcame it. And like, if, I played it 10 times, I'd be like, oh, great. Red chocobo, like, got it, like, don't know what to do about it. So it's a whole thing.
Well, and hypothetically because they're dynamic difficulty, they're, I mean, so are you basically saying that the story missions are not dynamic difficulty, or do they do?
Correct.
So if you're so you can really be over leveled for them if you try hard.
Right, but there's still this puzzle nature, so you can be unprepared for them anyway because you don't have the gear. I ran into another mission later where, so it turns out Elmdor, who is the real thorn in my side, not only is he turned out to be a bad guy, bad enough, he's also a vampire. Or at least he used an ability called Bloodsuck. So, actually, it says that your character turns into a vampire. So if he uses that, it's like an unbreakable charm. You are now a vampire and you work for him. So I had a mission where I met him later, which was, again, like the second or third in a chain, where it's like, oh, well, it turns out there's a thing to prevent that. There's a special accessory.
Oh.
And I didn't have it. Like, I might have had one, that I found at some point. And I didn't have it equipped on anybody. And, there's kind of an overwhelming force problem if you get down to just one person against not only the three kind of bosses that you're fighting, but also two of your own party who've been turned into vampires. Like, it becomes very difficult to overcome. And, once I actually had that thing, like, oh, okay, well, now I can beat this. It's actually not that hard. So you can be over leveled.
But there's a puzzly, like, lock and key.
There's a lot. There are lock and key elements, and I do find them frustrating. But only because it's like, oh, but I had to do two other things to get here. Like, I had to fight this, and then I fought this, and then I came to here. And like, at any point of that, there's probably other puzzle stuff. The first part, it's like, oh, they do stop. It's these assassins. Like, oh, okay, well, I've met them before, and I know they do stop. Well, this time they do a different type of attack, and I actually want some other defense. It's like, okay, well, I'll go, I've got plenty of money because I did all these propositions or whatever, so I've got money all the time. But I'm like, I think at one point I had basically 1 million gil. It was like 950,000 gil. So like, buying this stuff is never a problem. And I should just buy
everything,
5 of everything all the time, but I just don't, it's just not how I play. I just don't think of that. Like, I don't even think to look at the list of stuff and know it's new. I just use the helpful, what's the best fit for this character?
Yeah.
That's which changed. I think works against some of these things.
It does, because it has changed the way I think about the gear, because I really do like gear in RPGs generally.
Oh, we know,
like
Mr. Loot.
Yeah, I like the min-max, and some of it is about the looting, but some of it is about the combinations, right? It's like finding the right things, and I do like that in RPGs in general, but a lot of the Final Fantasy games often do have the best fit option that it's hard not to use.
Right.
and it kind of takes away the fun of it, really, because you're like, well, I'm going to let the program tell me what to do, because of course the program's smarter than me, so I'm just going to press this button, But then they teach you through, unfortunately, punishment that sometimes you shouldn't use that. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Well, you'll get there. You're almost done.
Yeah, I mean, and I've beaten it before. I think the first time I played it, so we had an email or maybe a comment in Discord about people who really enjoy this game or who are real devotees of the game think it's kind of it's just not the done thing to use the story characters, the characters you get in your party who are basically heroes in the story, because they often have abilities that you can't actually get. They're holy knights and whatever. There's a hell knight and a heaven knight you get in your party. I don't think you can be an engineer like Mustadio is. So these characters have built-in advantages, and I think you're probably meant to use them. The first time you play it, it's and I'm fairly certain I did. In fact, I am certain I did the first time I played it. So I sort of feel like at any point I could just be like, oh, I'll just go with Ramza and these other 4 characters who are basically uniquely suited to finish the story, right?
I see. Then you're saying the fans typically say that it's cheap to use those characters?
Exactly. Yeah. That's kind of, I mean, it's not cheating exactly, but it's just it's kind of frowned upon among the
we had a mail
FFT
about that, right?
cognoscenti. Yeah, I think we did. I was trying to remember where this.
Yeah, well, it could have been both, but I think we had a mail where they were saying that they were kind of auto balancers or ways to get through the game and feel powerful and kind of helped make it not so difficult. Yeah,
and I think that's true.
Interesting.
I mean, for me, the big thing that was motivating me to move on was I was trying to figure out what the mechanism was behind these additional classes, because I was like, I totally want a calculator, class. That sounds awesome. Because I know how strange that is, because I can remember. I don't know if they show up and you fight them in one level very towards the end or something, but I can remember having one the first time I played. I'm sure I used a guide, and of course I had our friend Andrew to be like, oh, you got to do this and you got to do that. Whenever I got stuck, I'm sure he was helpful.
Cracked the matrix on this.
I'm sure probably. He's our calculator. So there are classes that I was like, well, how do I find these? And now I'm understanding that actually I need to go and level in various classes. So I will probably spend another 10 hours doing just that and mucking with that stuff and trying to find all of those things. And I have some theories about how to do it. So without even using a guide, but.
Yeah. Well, that sense of, I mean, we talk about guides a lot and of this era and stuff because the internet wasn't as prominent as it is, but there is something to be said for the discovery of these systems too, where like the side quests, it's like, imagine those moments when somebody does find them without using a guide.
Yeah.
Those are really memorable, magical moments in an era like this.
What I would really love is them to just reinforce that happened. So I'm not imagining the other things that could be happening, because for me,
some sort of feedback.
Yeah. I'm basically inventing patterns based on what's happening in my game. Like, oh, that character type appeared when I turned level 30 and another one turned at level 35. It must be that every 5 levels, you're getting another class unlocked. And now I'm at level 62 and I haven't had a new class in 20 levels. And I'm like, why am I not getting any new classes? Like, this is, I must have to just keep going. So,
that's what I mean by feedback. If they would have said,
just
when
to be
you
like,
unlocked
Bing,
it,
you did this and it unlocked such and such. And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, just a little confirmation would be helpful there. So anyway, I was thinking tonight would be like, oh, we'll do this in a mailbag. And now we're at 45 minutes.
I know. Good work. You
underproduced.
carried us on this one.
Yeah. Well, let us indeed turn to those takeaways. It's our thing we do at the end of every series. Turn to some things that we would take away as game developers, or or even just as fans, like, hey, I like games that this, or I don't like when this. So let's turn to those. What is your first takeaway, sir? As is traditional. I know what it is. I have it as number one on my list that I've jotted down here while we were talking.
Well, it could go one of two ways for my number one, but
yeah, but I know what it is.
I think you know what it is. Yeah, and the fact that this is our last episode and such, I do. It's like Dwarf Fortress or something, where I feel like I just scratched the surface, right? And so it's hard to conclude on a game when I feel like I didn't get as far. But some of the fundamentals I definitely appreciated and got. And like I said, I do think ultimately this might be my favorite, especially if I ever do finish it someday. But yeah, my first one I'm not going to spend a lot of time on because all of last episode we talked about it. But the way I described it here, I'm calling it the motivation for grinding. And I mean that from a design sense. And again, for takeaways, for me, I often the things that I think become takeaways for me are things that I'm going to take away from my day job of like a revelation of like, I really, people should think about this differently, and eventually some of these people do, and developers have iterated on and made better. But, and my comment last week about the loot revelation, it isn't just about the slot machine of the loot, but it's also about getting that loot that helps you unlock a next progression of content, because really all I want to do is play the content. And I feel like in Final Fantasy games, often the grinding is put in there as an intentional, wall for you to grind against, gate for you to grind against. Not necessarily, I know it's not really arbitrary, but it kind of is arbitrary, right? Because this game is quite long. I just want to play the next mission.
Right.
And it's not that I don't like the combat, because I do like the combat, but the fact that they're forcing me, because I'm not getting loot from going and grinding, I'm literally just leveling my characters, and that is a balancing design that they chose to do. They chose to make the story mission at this level, and they knew exactly what they're doing. And if I'm not at that level, they're basically kind of arbitrarily adding time. You could argue they're trying to teach you the game by going and playing more random encounters and seeing more enemies and stuff.
We have an email from somebody who was like, well, actually, you don't need to grind, which is something I think we could discuss. I mean, I get, it's funny because this is not what I had picked as your first one, so I'm already off script. I thought you would go with a positive first.
No, my positive is the last one.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll try not to.
Well, actually, my second two are positive.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. This is just. But again, we probably spent too much time on grinding. But
yeah, I mean, I think
it relates to the dark.
So grinding is a balancing. Right? It's a balancing factor for sure. Like, I think if you are skilled, like, you don't have to grind in, take a drink, Dark Souls, if you're that good at the game. Like, if you're just really, really good, you don't have to grind. And I think that is probably also true to a degree here. I had the minor revelation that I should just be buying tons of all the stuff all the time. Like, I've had my armor get broken. I'd be like, oh, I really should just have some extra every time because I have the money. I should just have extra of everything. I have extra of all, like, the offensive, like, spell components for the samurai, the swords, basically, because those break. But because it doesn't sort of say, like, these could break, I don't think, like, oh, of course somebody could break my armor. And so when somebody does it, I'm like, dang it, I should have more of those. I can just fall back to the previous one or whatever. But it's always like, oh, yeah, why don't I just have more of those? That's dumb. And then, of course, by the time I get out of the sequence of events, I'm like, forgotten. Like, oh yeah, I should do that. So I don't learn. Basically, is the problem. Yeah, I mean, I don't think. I think there's an argument that grinding is not necessary. It's possible to do this, to some degree with skillful play, though you will have to replay story missions because you didn't, gear up in the right way or whatever.
Well, I won 8 times.
Yeah.
And it was, my ultimate success was based on skill, but I didn't enjoy playing the mission 8 times.
Right.
So,
but I wonder if there was gear available to you because, like, you didn't know until recently, like, oh, different cities have different gear.
I did that too, though I did go
yeah.
back. Yeah. And I
Okay.
did make sure I had the best gear I could get.
Okay.
So, and I think it helps some. Yeah. But
Yeah.
I mean, I think we'll get to it when we get to the mail, but the email about it, I'm sure. But
Yeah.
I understand the fact that you don't technically need to grind, but I do believe that
I think most players will. Yeah.
They tuned the game to encourage you to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they wouldn't have put it in. You know?
At the time, we didn't really have. It wasn't common in 1997 to have difficulty settings on games. So to just like have easy, medium, hard. And so I think that there's also a sense of like, well, if you are a person who just wants to play the story stuff, which is something we literally put in the, settings these days in some games anyway, certainly a lot of RPGs. Like if you just want to play the story, like I did that recently with a game where I was like, oh yeah, I don't really care. Like I don't want to be good at this combat. I don't care enough about it. I just want to see this story. Turned out there were some timing puzzles which were also difficult for me to beat. So I was like, oh, so glad you turned down the difficulty for me. Now I can't do this because my hands are old. It's because we didn't have that. They found other balancing means, right? And there was therefore also not a way for people to have harder difficulty. So they just tuned it so that there was the harder difficulty is what you had because, right. So,
well, and like that is the Dark Souls mentality too. And like Dark Souls, because of the grinding, like with your approach, that is always an option. If you're like, I don't want to do the skill grind, which is what I ended up doing, like banging my head against the wall until I memorize the patterns and execute, and can't, like the Kyle method, then that's an option. And like the email probably says that's an option here too. But I think your point about the difficulty levels is good, especially modern difficulty levels, because they aren't just easy, medium, hard. They're actually more motivated on thematic player personas. Like, what is your motivation as a player? Because I'm playing 2 playthroughs in Baldur's Gate 3, one co-op and one solo. And my solo one, I chose to play the tactician difficulty, which is meant to be harder, but it also is meant to focus around the combat being very tactical. And I really love it, but I intentionally chose that. In the co-op game, we're playing the vanilla, and it's just difficult enough, but mainly we just want to see the story.
Yeah.
And then they also have the story mission one. So yeah, so they didn't know at the time, or it's just yeah.
Well, anyway. We'd just be happy that we have that evolution these days.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They're relevant and impact today.
Exactly. I think I will start with my negative. You got that I am retaining some of it, but I do find the story to be overwhelming.
Yeah, a lot of characters.
There's so many characters, and their relationships are very, like, they'll be stated, but then by the time I see that character again, I'm not going to remember.
There are a lot of similar characters too, right?
Yeah,
there's a lot of family, rather royal, and I'm not even as far as you, but I know there's a lot of royal families, and
there's also a high priest who's going to come in later, like. And the only scene I think I saw him in was the scene in which he died, but I'd been hearing about him, or kind of couple scenes around that. But like, I'd been hearing about him forever. So actually that character wasn't terrible in the sense I was like, okay, I knew this guy was coming and he had a role like that I knew. But yeah, between Dysadarg and Zalbag, and then there's like Larg and Galtana, who are these guys who are commanding these big armies that are fighting one another. Like, I don't know who I should identify with, and I feel like Ramza would kind of know and have opinions about these people. Like, they both claim to be the regent, maybe, or something like that. Like, this is all stuff that's kind of established at the beginning, and like, these people come up, their names come up, and I'm like, I don't know what's going on anymore. Like, and then another Beowulf brother, I think, dies at one point, and I'm like, yeah, I can't remember his name now. And they tied back to the dad, and that was a cool moment because at least I remembered that because it had different art and stuff, and like they were also very clear. Now I will say at the same time, there are restrictions on translation, and we've talked about this in prior Japanese games, because of the structure of the Japanese language versus the structure of English, and basically how they use ideograms, or like I guess you'd call them particles or something like that, but like pieces, that convey a lot more meaning than, let's say, the letter E. It's like we need 3 letters to say the, and they need one little, gesture. And, that makes translation very difficult. So that may be a translation problem, but it is, and that's a technical problem of the time, because there's just not enough space to fit in a full English translation. It was also less common for these sorts of things to be translated. It was becoming a problem at the time that people were figuring out. In fact, when we went and translated our games on the PS2, man, I can remember having conversations with the Japanese translation and being like, yeah, I don't know what to tell you. Like, because they were trying to do the reverse. Like, well, we have to explain who this person is. I'm like, yeah, I'm sorry. Like, I'm probably the wrong person to answer these questions for you. First of all, like, for some reason, programmers were in charge of talking to localization on those things. But anyway,
well, that's why.
The story becomes overwhelming, and like there are times where I'm like, I think a big part of it is like if you choose a theme of the Zodiac, there are now 12 important stones, like, and who has control of them at all the times is like. There's a reason why, I get it. It's, it's a 30 or 40 hour game or whatever it is. Whereas Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, it's the one cup.
Yeah.
They're just trying to get to the one cup. And now we've got 12 of them. So, and all the minutiae. Anyway.
Editing.
You can you want to compress down for a 2-hour movie, I guess, versus a 40-hour game. But it is, I'm often like, I need signposts.
Yeah.
Who are these people and why do I care?
Well, I think it's almost like 10 hours to get to the first stone, so there's also a lot of like setup to, But,
and all that should be, is supposed to be, I think, pretty important to the story. But I think that, the themes I can identify pretty clearly. They're often pretty well stated. And I think that it's, the flip side of this is I think the themes are actually good and interesting. And actually pretty well depicted. It's just the details are very easy to get lost in, and so I'm frequently just being like, yep, don't know who that is. No idea. I think that might be one of my guys, one of my brothers. No idea. Yeah, it could be.
Well, and I think that's, to your description of the story when I asked you about it, you weren't talking about characters, individuals. You were talking about the themes and the macro events and things, right? And I think that's usually a sign when somebody tries to describe a story back to you, summarize a story back to you, the way that they tell it is usually very telling about how it was given to them.
Yeah.
If it
felt a little drunk history to me, actually.
Yeah, fair.
All right, give me number 2.
Yeah, we're running long. Number 2, I just wrote down as more intentional combat, which people are going to throw things at me through their listening devices, because they're going to say Final Fantasy VI has very intentional combat and the active time battle system is perfect.
Oh, 6. Okay, 6.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, whatever. I'm just because I'm playing that as well.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's probably because I just have not mastered those games as well, because if maybe there's the savants out there that know exactly how active time battle bars are filling and when, and like how to order it right so you can really be predictable. And but this game has predictable, albeit there are RNG complaints that we have, and there's always the AI elements that are tricky for tactical games because it's hard to predict exactly what somebody's going to do sometimes. But all that being said, and I think people throw things at me for this comment too, but imagine maybe like a 20% simpler version of this game's combat inside Final Fantasy VI. Instead of playing You play everything about Final Fantasy VI. Love the game. Everything about it is the same, except when you go into battles, you're playing tactical combat like this with tiles, very intentional, cause and effect. You get your turns. I mean, the game would be 500 hours, but and that's why I gave a caveat of like,
boy, would I be ticked about random battles.
Yeah, and random battles maybe is a whole. I think I had a takeaway about that in one of the previous shows or series, so I won't hit that. But they're definitely tightly coupled problems. But anyway, more intentional combat takeaway within an RPG context, and I didn't think about it at the time, but I kind of accidentally brought up Baldur's Gate 3. That game has that.
Yeah.
And in fact, all of Larian's games, I think the original Sin games are better than Baldur's Gate 3 from a combat perspective. I know that also might.
Yeah, I wouldn't say the earliest ones are amazing, but
no, the Divinity original Sin games, those two. I could talk your ear off on that versus Baldur's Gate 3 because Baldur's Gate 3 is trying to replicate 5th edition rules, right? And it just doesn't translate to computer game well enough.
Inherent limitation.
Yeah, it's silly to have reactions and bonus actions and then also an action, and it's like, no, just give me a point system, and that's what Larian usually does. But anyway, it's basically XCOM within an RPG, and they're great. So
well, I didn't expect to overlap on this one because I guess I know what the third one's going to be now, so I'll go to this one. I just wrote down cool tactics that are mostly predictable. One of the things I like,
a much better summary than what I just said.
Well, I mean, it's going to tie in with my third one and your third one, I think, because one of the things I appreciate, I play with a couple of Lancers, and one of the things I love about that is, I often have those characters they wear these speed shoes that basically give them faster speed, but what that means is I have to really pay attention to what enemies have moved and when. So that if I jump, they're still going to be there when I land.
That's really hard. That's a skill thing for sure.
Yeah, but it's one of those things where I develop that skill, as long as I'm paying attention, I do it most of the time. Like I wouldn't say it's second nature. It still requires some focus for me and things like that, but it is a thing where it's like I've developed that muscle pretty well, and it makes me feel good every time I land like a 1-2 punch, and like keeping track of like, okay, well, I'm going to do this much damage with this person before that character lands. So I want to have this other character who's a Lancer target somebody else that somebody else is also going to target. So I can take out 2 in this turn, et cetera. And like being able to plan that all out, admittedly the support is there, as you point out, but you'd never want to actually spend it every turn looking at like what's going to happen next, or when these things are going to happen.
Hitting left on the D-pad or
there's a way to go and look at it, and it's just like, I've never done it. Whenever I hit that button, it's like, oh, that was an accident, and I move away.
Yeah, it's cumbersome.
It's too much. But you can learn that skill, and nail it most of the time. And when you don't, you go, oh yeah, right, that person had whatever, also had speed or something. Like there's some reason why I failed, or I just didn't, or I made a guess. Like I was like, well, it's a random battle. I'm going first. Yeah, this time I'll take a roll of the dice and I'll try to attack some things, and it didn't work out. And it's like, okay, well, that's on me. I should have waited, and things like that. So, anyway, I do really like the tactics. I feel like I have a lot more skill with it. And I'm just frustrated when it's like, oh yes, but you need the skill and you have to know what to unlock this with, what gear you had to have for this story mission. But that actually just really shows me how powerful the tactics generally is like, oh, when I actually have to know something else that's kind of not signaled to me, I'm frustrated. That's because the other stuff is really good and I actually have learned it. So
it's a brilliant game in that regard for sure. Yeah. I mean, there's frustrations. I think my frustrations are mostly balancing. It's not really the systems of it all. It's really just where it ended up from a balance perspective. But the tactics portion, I have a fourth bonus that I don't think we'll get to, but what it made me think of is I miss Advance Wars. Because I think that was
the clarity there is excellent.
Yeah, it's very clear. It's kind of like a modern version of this, but it's also simpler.
Yeah.
But I still have that gratification of like really fine tuning my tactics, my tactical choices.
That one's really like chess.
Yeah, it's very chess and rock paper scissors and all that stuff. But yeah, I just have fond memories of that series.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
All
right, the third one is
the third one.
1, 2, 3. Job system.
Job system. Yeah, the job and ability system is revelatory, brilliant. Yeah. I want to know. Please, audience, tell me all the games that have ripped it off since. I will play those games. Yeah, I don't know of any. I assume they're in the Final Fantasy series, or maybe they're not. Maybe they're in other JRPGs, but it's very good. Like I'll give one example because I could talk about this for too long. But one example I had in last episode we were talking about that wall mission I was on, and you're like, "Well, did you bring your chemist?" And I was like, "Yeah, I didn't because I'm trying to focus on my priest and blah blah blah." But then, and I didn't end up having time to do this, but I could if I wanted to. It dawned on me that I could give my priest the throw item ability.
Yes, you can.
And I was like, mind blown. I was like, wait, I can still focus on my priest if I just give her this. And then she also has her priestly duty. You know, it's just like, it's really the matrix of it. The fact that you have to make hard decisions on which in this 5 slots you're going to pick, you know, because I have double damage or extra damage on my wizard, but I also want him to get extra job points. So that's a really hard decision to make.
That's a tough one to make.
You know, but and what they chose to put where in the matrix, it's really good. I love it.
Yeah. I don't have a lot to add there, although, you know, we did talk a little bit this episode about like, oh yeah, but there are jobs that I know are out there, you know, and I haven't been able to find them. And now I'm like, oh, I got to go do this. Like I didn't realize because I misidentified the pattern, which is, you know, it's on me. It's fine. I should have realized long before
It's never on the player. Come on, you know. I mean, it's to your point. Like, there's no feedback.
I just held on to it for too long. I mean, honestly, I could have. There is no feedback, and it would be nice to have feedback. But it does. It's like every new thing you open is also like a gift. Oh, okay. How's this going to change? You know, it ties into the tactical part. Like, how is this going to change how I approach combat? You know, and I want to see those because I want to see the ways in which that's going to change. You know, and it's like. You know, with the dancer, I was like, man, what could you do with the dancer? Like, I was really just like, how would I play differently if I always had a dancer in the party? Like, what other classes would I use with it? You know, it's sort of like when you build a character, you know, in D&D or whatever, you're like, oh, I'm looking for these, you know, these different abilities that are going to work well together, you know, and as time has gone on, like there's been more guidance with that from the publisher, from, you know, and now Wizards or whatever, but like that's like, oh, well, we actually have these subclasses. You just pick one of those and it, you know, follow that track and it does that for you. But in the old days, it was like, well, I could take this ability, you know, usually from this particular book or whatever, and then I could match it with this ability, you know, and it's the same thing that you're talking about, but it's at the class level. You know, it's like, oh, this set of skills, a very special set of skills, would match well with this other class. It's like, oh, if I had those two, you know, I could build a whole thing around that, you know, and so that's a real thing that I appreciate about the job system as well, is like, it feels like there's infinite potential combinations to explore. You know, it's like, you see why people play this multiple times. They want to check out, like, you know what, I went really heavy on this because it started being very successful, you know, and so I just kind of wrote it through the end of the game and whatever. And like you play it again, you're like, okay, I don't want to use that at all this time. Like, let me find some other class, you know, and, you know, have it maybe be unbalanced when I've got it mastered or whatever, you know, when you're at level 8 and you've bought all the skills, that's called mastery, you know, etc. So I don't know. It's super cool. So the other thing I found myself doing was like imagining if this game had achievements, What would those achievements be like?
Yeah.
And trying to do those things. So
yeah,
I killed 3 people in one monk attack at one point, and I was like, that's a total achievement right there. That's an achievement.
That's awesome.
And it came out of the job system for me. So
yeah,
cool.
Yeah,
cool
and I mean, I think that the other way for me that I think about it after what you were just describing is it's not truly this, but it's almost like because it's so customizable. I know you choose a primary job and there are certain things that come when you do choose a primary job, but in a way there are no classes.
Right.
It's just what abilities you've chosen.
Right.
And that is like a whole different way to think about classes in an RPG. It's like, what if there are no, we're so used to, especially because of the MMOification of things, we're so used to the common tropes of classes and roles that, it's like, what if you throw all that away? It's really,
what if my DPS could also be my healer?
Yeah, exactly. It's fascinating. It's fascinating. And I had no idea that was in this game. So I'm really happy about that.
Yeah, I wish more games did it, to be honest. And absolutely send an email. You can do that at devgameclub@gmail.com. See that segue? Going right into the outro stuff. We also love to have your reviews. We got one this week. We're at an hour 10 right now, so we're gonna call it here.
So many emails. Well, we got
they're piling up at this point. We're gonna have to definitely mail back. I was actually thinking about this. I actually had a little production note about our schedule over the next few weeks. We are both in like summer vacation time to some degree. Tim has a number of obligations over the next few weeks. Life stuff. I have one of my own, which is an annual thing I do. So there will be an episode next week, which is an interview that we've previously recorded, and so that'll be out in the feed.
Surprise! You're gonna love it. You're gonna love it.
It's great, and then it will be, I think, 2 weeks off. We actually haven't talked about that.
I think you're right.
But I think
we're gonna have to assume.
Yeah, I assume that, and we'll see if not. I actually have a suggestion for you that we can talk about off there. But just so you know, that's what's coming. You can find us on the web at devgameclub.com or on Twitter, Threads, and Instagram at devgameclub. I really no longer Twitch, but you can find my buddy here twitching at twitch.tv/Tim
Longo Jr. with the JR at the end, and I will obviously be off. I already posted this on Discord, but
that's already been
during that time.
Another great segue. We also have a fan-run Discord. The link is in the show notes. It's a good time. Go hang out. It's fun to meet folks over there. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast Aaron Evers, and our logo, that Discord, our merch store, all by Mark Garcia, who got mentioned earlier in the episode, no less. Have fun relying on miracles instead of beating your insecurities this week. And good night.
Good night. Ooh, wow.